In a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the countryside, a young woman swept floors at a local diner, her hands calloused from hard work. She was nothing more than a humble waitress to the locals, but what they didn't know was that she was the daughter of one of the wealthiest billionaires in the world. Her presence in this small town was no accident. What was she running from? And why had she chosen such an inconspicuous life? Little did anyone know, the events that would follow her discovery would not only shock her father, but also change their lives forever. The protagonist, Eleanor Ellie Chambers, was a striking young woman with soft brown eyes and auburn hair, often tied in a simple braid. At 23 years old, she lived in a modest apartment above the diner where she worked. To the townsfolk, Ellie was just a kind-hearted girl with an infectious laugh, always willing to lend a hand or share a word of encouragement. Her quiet, unpretentious nature endeared her to everyone, though she rarely spoke about her past. The diner, her sanctuary, was a cozy, vintage spot with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hummed old classics. Ellie found solace in its rhythm, the clatter of plates, the murmur of regulars, and the occasional ringing bell as customers came and went. Outside, the town was a postcard-perfect setting. Tree-lined streets, quaint houses, and a general store where everyone knew each other's names. Ellie's life, however, was a far cry from the lavish upbringing she had left behind. Her father, Victor Chambers, was a self-made billionaire, known worldwide for his sprawling tech empire and larger-than-life persona. For Ellie, growing up in the shadow of wealth and constant scrutiny had been stifling. While her father thrived on power and prestige, Ellie yearned for a simpler existence, one where she could connect with people for who they were, not what they had. The tension between father and daughter had reached a breaking point the year prior. Ellie, disillusioned by her father's endless demands for perfection and his transactional approach to relationships, had walked away from the life of privilege. She had severed all ties, leaving behind her luxurious penthouse and the suffocating expectations of being a billionaire's daughter. In this small town, Ellie found a freedom she had never known. She spent her days pouring coffee and sharing stories with the regulars, and her nights sketching landscapes in a worn notebook. She felt invisible and ordinary, exactly what she wanted. But Ellie's peaceful life was about to be disrupted. One fateful afternoon, while delivering a tray of burgers to a group of tourists, she overheard a conversation that made her heart skip a beat. "Did you hear? That billionaire's daughter, Ellie Chambers, disappeared last year. No one's seen her since. Imagine giving up all that money." Ellie froze. The customers were scrolling through a news article, her own face plastered across the screen. They hadn't recognized her yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Word would spread, and the life she had built for herself would crumble. As whispers about Ellie's true identity began to circulate, her world teetered on the edge of chaos. The town's kindness turned into curiosity, then suspicion. Why was she here? What was she hiding? And when Victor Chambers finally discovered where his daughter had been all this time, his reaction would leave Ellie and the town stunned. Rising action. Ellie's once peaceful existence began unraveling the moment her secret started to leak. It began innocently enough. A curious question from a co-worker at the diner. "Ellie, you ever thought about modeling or something? You've got that big city look." She laughed it off, brushing away the comment, but soon the questions became more pointed. "Why don't you have family visiting? Where are you really from?" Ellie had always been careful to deflect attention, but the whispers became impossible to ignore. She noticed how the regulars at the diner started glancing at her differently, their warm smiles tinged with curiosity. Her landlord, Mrs. Jenkins, even asked her outright one evening as Ellie handed over the rent. "Ellie, you're not in trouble, are you? I heard something about, well, Some big-shot family looking for someone. Ellie shook her head, forcing a reassuring smile. No, nothing like that. Just a quiet life here, Mrs. Jenkins. But the dam finally broke when a tabloid journalist arrived in town. A sharp-eyed photographer had snapped Ellie's photo weeks earlier, and the story of the missing billionaire's daughter had reignited interest in the media. The journalist, a shrewd and persistent man named Mark Lawson, showed up at the diner one morning, armed with questions. "Ellie Chambers?" he asked, stepping up to the counter with a knowing smile. Ellie felt her stomach drop. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. "Maybe. Or maybe I've found the story of the year," he replied, sliding a business card across the counter. "Your secret's safe, for now, but I think you owe the world an explanation." The encounter left Ellie rattled. She knew it was only a matter of time before the story broke. True to form, Mark's article hit the headlines just days later, plastering Ellie's face across every major outlet. The caption read, "Billionaire heiress found living as a waitress in small town. Why did she run?" The town erupted into a frenzy. People who had once respected Ellie's privacy now bombarded her with questions and unsolicited advice. Tourists flocked to the diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of the billionaire's daughter. Ellie felt trapped in a spotlight she had worked so hard to escape. And then Victor Chambers arrived. Ellie was washing dishes in the diner's kitchen when she heard the unmistakable hum of a luxury car pulling up outside. She peeked through the window and saw him step out, his imposing figure commanding attention even in the sleepy town. Dressed in a tailored suit and flanked by two assistants, Victor scanned the diner with an expression that was equal parts determination and disappointment. Ellie's heart pounded as she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the dining area. The room fell silent as father and daughter locked eyes for the first time in over a year. "Eleanor," Victor said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." The confrontation that followed was both explosive and heartbreaking. Victor demanded to know why Ellie had abandoned her life and her responsibilities. Ellie, in turn, accused him of valuing appearances and wealth over family. "You don't care about me, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "You care about the image of a perfect daughter who fits into your perfect world." Victor's face softened for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Ellie, you've been living a lie. Do you think hiding away in this town will solve anything?" "This isn't a lie," she shot back. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living." Their argument spilled out into the street, drawing a crowd of onlookers. As emotions ran high, Ellie finally revealed the truth about her decision to leave. "I was tired of being a puppet in your world," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to find out who I am, without the money, without the expectations." Victor stood in stunned silence as her words sank in. For the first time, he realized the depth of his daughter's pain and the sacrifices she had made to escape the life he had built for her. The moment was interrupted by Mark Lawson, who had been lurking nearby with a camera. He stepped forward, eager to capture the emotional exchange. "Ellie, Victor, any comment for the press?" he asked, his voice dripping with opportunism. Victor turned to the journalist with an intensity that left Mark visibly shaken. "You've done enough damage. Leave my daughter alone." The declaration marked a turning point. Victor, who had always prioritized his public image, was now standing up for Ellie in a way he never had before. Ellie watched in silence as her father turned back to her. "I don't understand your choices," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But I want to try. Let me be part of your life again." The vulnerability in his words caught Ellie off guard. For the first time in years, she saw her father not as a billionaire or a controlling figure, but as a man trying to reconnect with his daughter. Climax. The air in the small-town diner was thick with tension as Ellie and Victor faced each other. It felt as though time had paused, the weight of years of estrangement and unspoken words pressing down on them. Outside, the once quiet street was now bustling with curious onlookers and tourists drawn by the unfolding drama. Ellie could feel their stares, but her focus remained on her father. Victor took a deep breath, his expression a mix of determination and regret. "Ellie," he began, his voice lower and softer now, "I came here to bring you home, to remind you of the life you left behind. But standing here, I realize I may not even know who you really are anymore." Ellie folded her arms, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "That's because you never tried to know me, Dad. You only ever cared about the version of me that fit into your world, a world I couldn't survive in." Victor flinched at her words but didn't look away. He took a step closer, his towering figure somehow less imposing now. "I thought I was protecting you, giving you every opportunity to succeed. I didn't realize that what I saw as care, you saw as control." Ellie's heart ached at the raw honesty in his voice, but years of frustration couldn't be erased so easily. "You didn't just control me, Dad. You smothered me. Every decision I made was second-guessed. Every choice had to fit your vision of perfection. Do you know what that does to a person?" Before Victor could respond, the scene was interrupted by Mark Lawson, the relentless journalist who had been trailing them since he broke the story. Mark shoved his way through the crowd, camera in hand, his smirk brimming with self-satisfaction. "Well, isn't this touching?" Mark said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "A billionaire trying to win back his runaway daughter. It's the kind of story that'll sell headlines for weeks." Victor's jaw tightened as he turned to Mark, his protective instincts kicking in. "You've done enough damage, Lawson. Leave us alone." Mark scoffed, his camera lens trained on Ellie. "Oh, come on, Mr. Chambers. The public has a right to know why your daughter chose to give up her silver spoon for a spatula. It's a fascinating story." Ellie stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "This isn't about the public, Mark. This is my life. You've invaded my privacy, turned my world upside down, and for what? A few clicks and views." Mark didn't back down. "It's not my fault your life is newsworthy. You chose to walk away from your father's empire. People want to know why." Before Ellie could respond, Victor did something that stunned everyone. He stepped in front of Ellie, shielding her from Mark's camera. "If you want to know why, then listen closely," he said, his voice firm and unyielding. "My daughter left because I failed her. I prioritized my business over my family. I pushed her to live a life she didn't want, and I'm here to make things right, not for the headlines, but because I love her." The crowd gasped at his admission, and for the first time, Mark seemed at a loss for words. Ellie stared at her father, her defenses wavering. She had never heard him speak so candidly, so vulnerably. Victor turned back to Ellie, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't change the past, Ellie, but I want to try to understand you, to support you in whatever life you choose. Please, let me be your father again." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his voice, the public declaration of his faults. It was more than she had ever expected. But just as she began to consider opening her heart to him, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't fall for it if I were you," a woman said, stepping out of the crowd. It was Sandra, one of the diner's regulars, and someone Ellie had considered a friend. Her expression was cold, her arms crossed as she looked Victor up and down. "Sandra?" Ellie asked, confusion lacing her voice. "What are you talking about?" Sandra's gaze shifted to Ellie, her eyes hard. "Do you really think he's here for you, Ellie? Men like him don't change. He's only here because your story is making waves and he wants to control the narrative. Ellie felt her stomach churn. That's not true. My dad. He wouldn't. Wouldn't he? Sandra interrupted, her voice sharp. Ask him why a man with a private jet and limitless resources suddenly decides to show up now, after more than a year of silence. The crowd murmured, the energy shifting once again. Ellie turned to Victor, her eyes searching his face for answers. Dad? Is that true? Victor's shoulders slumped, his carefully composed facade cracking. Ellie, I didn't come here because of the media. I came because I missed you, but Sandra's right about one thing. Your story did bring you back to my attention. I saw the headlines, and it made me realize how much I'd lost. Ellie felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. So, if Mark hadn't published that article, would you have even thought about me? Victor's face crumpled, and for the first time, he looked truly vulnerable. I don't know, he admitted, but seeing you here, hearing you speak your truth, it's opened my eyes in a way I didn't expect. Ellie's emotions swirled, anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. She looked at Sandra, then at the crowd, and finally back at her father. I don't know if I can trust you, Dad. Not yet. Victor nodded, his expression resolute. Then let me earn it. Stay here. Live your life the way you want. But let me be part of it, on your terms. Ellie studied him for a long moment, her heart warring with her head. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but this isn't a free pass. If you want to be in my life, you have to meet me where I am. Victor smiled, a small, tentative smile that spoke of hope. I wouldn't have it any other way. Sandra, still skeptical, muttered under her breath and walked away, leaving Ellie and Victor to face the crowd together. For the first time, Ellie felt a flicker of possibility, a chance to rebuild their relationship, not as billionaire and heiress, but as father and daughter. As the sun set over the small town, the crowd began to disperse, leaving Ellie and Victor standing outside the diner. I'll be in town for a few days, Victor said. Maybe we can have dinner tomorrow, just talk. Ellie nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. I'd like that. The path to healing wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like a real possibility. And that was enough. Resolution. The days following Victor's dramatic visit to the small-town diner brought a mix of hope and uncertainty. The townsfolk, who had watched the emotional exchange unfold like a scene from a movie, quickly returned to their routines. But for Ellie and Victor, life had irrevocably changed. Victor stayed true to his word. He rented a modest cabin on the outskirts of town rather than staying in a lavish hotel, signaling his intent to meet Ellie on her terms. It was a stark contrast to the life he was accustomed to. No luxury suites, no personal chefs. The small town's simplicity challenged him, but he embraced it as part of his effort to reconnect with his daughter. Ellie, still cautious, approached their reconciliation slowly. She agreed to meet Victor for dinner at the diner, a place that had become her sanctuary. They sat in a quiet booth, the hum of conversations and clinking silverware providing a comforting backdrop. I didn't think you'd actually stay, Ellie admitted as she stirred her coffee, her voice carrying both skepticism and a glimmer of hope. Victor chuckled softly. I'm not the man I was, Ellie. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm willing to try. Over the next few weeks, their dinners became a ritual. At first, they stuck to safe topics: Ellie's life in the town, Victor's work, and shared memories of Ellie's childhood. Slowly, deeper conversations emerged. Victor opened up about his regrets, his single-minded focus on building his empire, and how it had blinded him to the needs of those he loved. I thought I was doing it for you, he confessed one evening, his voice tinged with sorrow. But I see now that I was just trying to fill a void within myself. Ellie listened, her heart softening as she saw the vulnerability in her father's eyes. "I think I was running from more than just you," she admitted. "I needed to find out who I was, away from all of it." These conversations didn't erase the past, but they created a foundation for a new understanding. Victor began to see Ellie not as an extension of his ambitions, but as her own person with dreams and struggles he had never taken the time to know. Meanwhile, the small town watched the father-daughter relationship unfold with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Ellie's friends and co-workers, initially wary of Victor, began to see a different side of him. He frequented the diner not just to see Ellie, but also to engage with the locals. He listened to their stories, asked about their lives, and even joined in community events. At a charity bake sale for the local school, Victor surprised everyone by bidding generously on a batch of cookies baked by Ellie's closest friend, Clara. "You're trying too hard," Ellie teased him later, but there was warmth in her tone. "Maybe," Victor replied with a grin, "but it's worth it." Victor's actions didn't go unnoticed. The same people who had judged him as a distant, cold billionaire began to see him as a man trying to make amends. The whispers of skepticism gradually turned into nods of approval. One day, as Ellie and Victor walked through the park, they ran into Sandra, the woman who had publicly questioned Victor's intentions at the diner. Sandra's sharp words had lingered in Ellie's mind, but the encounter was unexpectedly cordial. "I still don't trust billionaires," Sandra said bluntly, crossing her arms. "But I have to admit, you've stuck around longer than I thought you would." Victor smiled, unoffended. "Sometimes people surprise you." Sandra nodded, her gaze shifting to Ellie. "If he messes up, you know where to find me." Ellie laughed, a genuine sound that felt like a breakthrough. "I'll keep that in mind." A turning point. The real turning point came when Victor decided to use his resources to support the town. He noticed the struggling local library and quietly funded its renovation, ensuring it had modern facilities and enough books to inspire generations. When the mayor held a ribbon-cutting ceremony, Victor insisted on keeping his name out of it. "This isn't about me," he told Ellie. "It's about giving back." Ellie was moved by his gesture. For the first time, she saw her father using his wealth in a way that aligned with the values she had embraced in the town. It was a far cry from the corporate takeovers and boardroom battles that had defined his life. The townsfolk, too, were impressed. The renovation became a symbol of hope and renewal, and Victor's role in it earned him a place in their hearts. As Victor spent more time in the town, he began to reflect on the way he had run his company. He started making changes, delegating more responsibilities to trusted executives, and shifting the company's focus toward philanthropic initiatives. It was a significant departure from his previous strategies, but it felt right. Ellie, in turn, found herself re-evaluating her own choices. She loved the life she had built, but her father's presence reminded her of the skills and opportunities she had once left behind. Inspired by Victor's efforts to change, Ellie began volunteering at the library, teaching children about the joys of storytelling and creativity. Their relationship, once fractured, began to heal in ways neither of them had anticipated. Victor learned to listen, while Ellie discovered the strength to forgive, not just her father, but also herself for running away. The story of Ellie and Victor's reconciliation held a powerful message about the importance of empathy, understanding, and the willingness to change. It showed that even the deepest wounds could heal when both sides were willing to meet halfway. Victor's journey from a controlling billionaire to a humbled, compassionate father was a testament to the transformative power of love and self-awareness. He had learned that wealth and success meant little without meaningful connections. Ellie's story too carried a lesson. Her decision to leave her privileged life and forge her own path wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was a quest for authenticity. By staying true to herself, she had created a life filled with purpose and community. Together, their stories illustrated the importance of balance, of finding a way to honor one's roots while still growing in new directions. One crisp autumn morning, Ellie and Victor stood outside the diner, watching the sun rise over the small town. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery next door, and the streets were just beginning to stir. "Do you think you'll ever leave this place?" Victor asked, his tone light but curious. Ellie smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden hues of the sunrise. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But for now, this is home." Victor nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "I think I finally understand why you love it here." As they stood there, a group of children ran past, laughing and carrying books from the newly renovated library. One of them stopped and waved at Ellie, who waved back with a grin. Victor watched the scene unfold, his heart swelling with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Ellie," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked, turning to him. "For teaching me what really matters," he replied. "For giving me a second chance." Ellie's smile widened, and she reached out to take his hand. "We've both learned a lot, Dad, and I think we're just getting started." As the morning sun bathed the town in warmth, Ellie and Victor walked down the street together, their steps in sync. The journey ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face it, together. The story of Ellie and Victor became a source of inspiration, not just for the town, but for anyone who heard it. It reminded people that change was always possible, that relationships could be mended, and that true wealth came from the connections we build and the lives we touch. And so, in the heart of that small town, a father and daughter began a new chapter, one defined not by the expectations of the world, but by the love and understanding they had found in each other.